All right, folks, back again. Going to be talking about speech and language impairment. So under IDEA, speech and language impairment means basically an impairment in one of these processes. So either articulation or language, right? Within articulation, there's going to be a lot of like fancy terminology. You might hear things like, a substitution of this letter for that sound or things like that. So those are like more of the typical articulation. There's also things such as stuttering and lisp, things like that. So speech or language impairment has that piece of, yes, they have that articulation concern or that language concern, and that language concern can be knowledge based, as in like they don't have enough language, or pragmatic language. Of course, that part it would be more so on the autism spectrum disorder. But that's for another video, talking about speech language impairment kiddos and kids that are autism. So that's a whole controversy. So maybe I'll put that in short. But so I will say that in speech and language impairment, they do rely heavily on the scores, because typically they want them a little bit below a certain percentile to kind of prove that gap. There are some sounds that are developmentally appropriate, and you'll hear that term, especially up to age 8 or age 4. So it just depends on what the concern is. So like I said, I'm not a speech pathologist. I work closely with a lot of speech pathologists and have a lot of a huge, tremendous respect for what they do, because really, in a lot of ways, psychology is kind of like what they call like a soft science, but speech pathology and speech and language, I mean, it's evidence. It's black and white. They have the sounds, they don't have the sounds, they have a language, they don't have a language, and their strategies that they utilize, you can see the results. So it's very, very, very scientific. So what I will say is on speech and language impairment, you have to always ask for clarification on what the articulation is, because again, you'll hear things like the initial, final, medial, and a lot of times we just kind of say those terms without really thinking about, the parent may or may not even understand what that means. So always making sure how or where that sound is coming from, like kind of getting a more of a layman's term as far as like what the articulation concern is in the language. You kind of want to know what type of language disorder they kind of they see. And then again, that's just the identification of disability, and just like every other disability category, in order to get special education, it has to be impacting them some way. So I do have kids at my school that have the articulation concerns, but by the time they're in middle school, a lot of times they're stimulable, which means they have the ability to do it. They just need to practice, or it's just not impacting them at this time. So, and that's what the big kind of subjective factor is, and really keying in on that. What's the impact to education? Because it is just like any other disability category. Just because they have it doesn't mean they automatically get special education.